The man removing the brass letters from my hotel looked down from his ladder and said, "Ma'am, guests need to use the side entrance until the rebranding is complete." I stood beneath him with my hospital bracelet still around my wrist. "That isn't the guest entrance," I said. "That's the loading dock." He checked the clipboard clipped to his belt. Belmont's instructions. Behind him, the word Harborlight had already been reduced to Harbor. The last 5 letters lay face down on the sidewalk. Then, a young manager stepped through the revolving door wearing a gray suit. "Can I help you find someone?" "I'm Evelyn Mercer." He gave me the careful smile hotel employees use when they think an older guest is confused. "Should that name be on a reservation?" Before I could answer, my daughter came through the lobby. Rachel stopped when she saw me. For half a second, her face showed fear. Then she smoothed it into concern. "Mom, you weren't supposed to be discharged until tomorrow." Then I understood whatever had happened inside Harborlight had been timed around my absence. My name is Evelyn Mercer. I was 72, and for 41 years I had opened that lobby before sunrise, checked the night audit, and known which room had a loose hinge before maintenance did. My husband Arthur and I had turned a storm-damaged boarding house into a 46-room hotel overlooking Galveston Bay. Arthur had been dead 6 years. I had believed the hotel would outlive both of us. Rachel reached for my elbow. I moved before she touched me. "What are they doing to the sign?" "The new owners wanted the change immediately." "New owners?" Grant appeared behind her. My son-in-law wore no jacket despite the heat, and his collar was dark with sweat. He had always perspired when he lied. "Let's go inside," he said. The young manager blocked the revolving door. "Vendors and former staff are using the service entrance today." "Former staff." Rachel closed her eyes. "Caleb, she can come through." The lobby smelled wrong. Harborlight had always carried lemon oil, coffee, and sea air. That morning it smelled of fresh paint and artificial cedar. Arthur's photograph was gone. In its place hung a rendering of rooftop cabanas and a glass cocktail lounge. 3 employees I had hired stood behind the desk in new uniforms. None looked at me. Rachel led me into the conference room. Grant shut the door. A folder waited on the table. "Mom, we had to make a decision before the debt got worse." "What debt?" Grant pulled out a chair. "The coastal expansion ran over budget. Insurance costs doubled. Occupancy has been unstable. The expansion you told me was fully financed." His eyes shifted toward Rachel. I looked at my daughter. "What did you sign?" "Belmont bought Mercer Hospitality Group this morning." For several seconds, I heard only the air conditioning. "I own 45%, you did," Grant said. Rachel flinched. She pushed the folder toward me. Inside were shareholder resolutions, sale documents, and a notice exercising the drag-along provision in our corporate agreement. After Arthur died, I had transferred 55% of the company to Rachel to simplify the estate. I wanted Harborlight to remain in the family. I kept 45%, my title as Director of Operations, and the third-floor apartment, where Arthur and I had lived for 23 years. The apartment had never been protected in writing. Family promises rarely are. You voted to force the sale. It was the only way to prevent default. You could have called me. You were in the hospital. For 3 days, you collapsed in the breakfast room and woke up asking whether the Saturday wedding party had checked in. Grant leaned forward. "You don't know when to stop." I turned toward him. "No, I didn't know what you were doing." Rachel opened another folder. "Belmont is paying a fair price. Your share will be released after debts, taxes, and transaction costs." "How much debt?" Neither answered. Grant finally said, "The number is still being reconciled." That meant he knew it. I left the room and headed for the service elevator. My key card no longer worked. Rachel followed. "Mom, please." A Belmont guard approached. "My apartment," I said. "Open the elevator." Rachel stepped between us. "Your things have already been moved." "Moved where?" "A storage facility in Texas City. You emptied my home?" We packed everything carefully. Grant arrived carrying the small canvas bag I used for hospital stays. "Your medication is inside," he said, "and clothes for several days." I looked at the bag, then at the daughter I had raised in the rooms above us. "Where do you expect me to live?" Rachel took an envelope from her purse. "We reserved a suite at Seabrook Gardens, just for a month until you decide what comes next." "I never asked you to decide what came next. You need time to recover." I need access to my home. That apartment belongs to Belmont now. A housekeeper pushed a cart past us. On top of the folded linens lay a brass key. My key, Arthur had given it to me the night Harborlight opened. Harborlight Master 1 was engraved along the shaft. We had changed lock systems twice, but I kept it beside my desk. Rachel picked it up and placed it in my palm. "You can keep it," she said. "It doesn't open anything anymore." The guard stared at the floor. I closed my fingers around the key. "When did you decide I had become a problem instead of your mother?" Rachel's mouth opened. No answer came. Grant checked his watch. That hurt more than anything he could have said. I took the overnight bag and walked out through the loading dock. At Seabrook Gardens, the receptionist searched her computer and frowned. "There's a reservation hold, but the first month's payment was never completed." I called Rachel once. Voicemail. Outside, the afternoon heat pressed against the pavement. I sat near the bus terminal with my hospital bag at my feet and Arthur's useless key in my hand. A woman nearby was arguing into her phone. "No, I do not have 29 rooms, I have 17. Your system sold the same rooms twice." I listened for another minute. Then I said, "Your rooms aren't empty. Your booking channels are counting them twice." She turned toward me. "You know hotels." I looked down at the brass key, then closed my hand around it. "Yes," I said, "I know hotels." The woman studied me for several seconds. "My name is Rosa Delgado." She said, "If you're wrong, I'm going to miss half my check-ins tonight." If I'm wrong, you lose 10 minutes, and if you're right, you stop yelling at someone who can't fix it. That earned the smallest smile. Rosa handed me her phone. The reservation dashboard showed 3 booking channels feeding into the same room inventory. 1 had updated, 2 had not. "Your direct site is accurate," I said. "The others are selling old numbers." She looked at my hospital bracelet, my canvas bag, and the brass key in my hand. "You work around here?" "I did. Where?" "Harborlight." Her expression changed. Everyone in Galveston hospitality knew Harborlight. "You're Evelyn Mercer." "I was this morning." Rosa didn't ask what that meant. Her motel sat 15 minutes away in Texas City, between a tire shop and a seafood warehouse. Half the blue neon in Mariner's Rest had burned out. 31 doors faced an open parking lot. Inside, a young man in a green polo was trying to calm 6 people at once. "Malik," Rosa called. "How bad?" 2 baseball teams, 4 construction crews, 1 family reunion, and no rooms for 12 reservations. He looked at me. "Who's this?" "Someone who says our system is counting rooms twice." Malik turned his monitor toward me. "I checked inventory. You checked this screen. That's where inventory lives." "No, that's where the software tells you it lives." He folded his arms. "Print today's arrivals from every channel." I said, "We don't print them, then start." For the next hour, we spread reservation lists across the breakfast counter and marked names with colored pens. 17 available rooms, 29 promises. 1 platform had sold room 214 4 times. 3 families had already checked into rooms, the system still considered vacant. Malik stared at the paper. "That shouldn't be possible. People say that when something has already happened." Rosa rubbed her face. "What do we do?" I pointed toward the lobby. "We stop hiding back here." I spoke to each guest personally. 2 families accepted connecting rooms after partial refunds. A coach agreed to cots for 6 players if we supplied breakfast. A neighboring motel took 4 reservations. 1 man shouted for nearly 10 minutes. When he stopped, I said, "You reserved a room because you expected a place to sleep." "We failed that promise. I can't undo the failure, but I can tell you exactly what I can offer." He accepted a room 20 miles away and a free future stay. By midnight, everyone had a bed. Rosa locked the lobby door and leaned against it. "I thought we were finished." "You nearly were." Malik gave me a tired look. "You enjoyed that. No one enjoys an oversold hotel." "You looked comfortable." "Comfortable and happy aren't the same thing." Rosa poured coffee and sat across from me. "What happened at Harborlight?" I looked at the brass key beside my cup. "My daughter sold it. She waited. That's all I can say tonight." Rosa nodded. "Can you work nights?" I looked up. "I need someone until I fix this system." "Malik knows technology. I know how to keep the lights on. Neither of us knows how you got 30 angry people to stop threatening lawsuits." I listened exactly. She offered me room 108. The carpet had been removed after a leak, and 1 wall was covered in primer. In exchange, I would cover the night desk and help organize operations. I don't take charity, I said. Good, I don't give it. That was how I spent my first night away from Harborlight in a room smelling of plaster dust, with a towel beneath the leaking air conditioner. It was still better than a bus station. The next morning, Malik placed a tablet in front of me. If you're staying, you need to learn the system. I ran a hotel before you were born, and this software was updated last Tuesday. For 3 days, he taught me channel managers, digital keys, and refund controls. I learned slowly, which irritated us both. On the 4th night, a guest complained she had been charged twice. I found the transaction, selected what I believed was release hold, and confirmed it. Malik came running from the back office. What did you press? The refund authorization. You released every pending deposit from today. The total was $8. $4.60. My stomach tightened. Can you reverse it? Not from here. Rosa stood in the doorway. I wanted to blame the software. Instead, I said, I made the mistake. For 2 hours, Malik called the payment processor while I contacted guests. Most deposits were restored by morning, but Rosa lost access to nearly $2,000 for 48 hours. At sunrise, I placed my room key on her desk. You should find someone younger. Rosa pushed it back. You made one expensive mistake. At Harborlight, I would have fired someone for less. Then maybe Harborlight trained you to throw away people too quickly. I had no answer. Malik sat beside me. You know hotels, he said. You don't know this machine. No, then learn the machine. So I stayed. 2 weeks later, just after 1 in the morning, an elderly guest entered the lobby, complaining of a headache. His wife felt nauseated. Then a third guest called from the same hallway. The pattern bothered me. I took the master ring and walked toward the utility room. A yellow flame flickered beneath the water heater, where it should have burned blue. I turned toward Malik. Wake Rosa, we're emptying the east wing, all 12 rooms. Now by the time the fire department arrived, 23 guests stood in the parking lot in pajamas. A carbon monoxide detector near the utility room registered 4 times the safe limit. Afterward, a county safety and insurance inspector named Denise Wu handed Rosa a report. 12 rooms stay closed until the venting system is replaced, she said. You have 30 days to pass reinspection. Rosa's face went pale. We can't survive losing 12 rooms. Denise looked at me. If Ms. Mercer hadn't acted when she did, losing rooms would be the least of your concerns. After the fire trucks left, Rosa sat on the curb with the report in her lap. We have enough cash for 9 more days of payroll. I looked at the dark east wing, then at the brass key hanging from my belt. Then we have 30 days, I said, to prove this place is worth saving. 9 days of payroll sounds different when you know every person attached to it. Rosa had 6 housekeepers, 2 desk clerks, 1 maintenance man, Malik, and a breakfast cook named Teresa who supported 3 grandchildren. Closing 12 rooms did not reduce the people depending on their checks. It only reduced the money available to pay them. I spent that morning at the breakfast counter with a legal pad. We keep 19 rooms open, I said. We close the east wing in sections, no overtime unless safety requires it. We suspend the laundry contract and handle linens ourselves. Rosa stared at the page. That saves 4 days. Then we find 4 more. Malik turned his monitor toward us. The port contractors need long-term rooms next month. Next month doesn't pay Friday, Rosa said. It might if they prepay a block. I looked at him. Build a proposal. By noon, Malik was contacting construction companies. Rosa was negotiating with suppliers, and I was calling contractors I had known during my years at Harborlight. Most calls ended politely. Calvin Reese answered. He had replaced half Harborlight's plumbing after Hurricane Ike. He told stories too loudly, charged too much, and always finished before inspection. I can start Monday, he said, half up front. Rosa looked uneasy when I gave her the price. That takes nearly everything we have. He's expensive because he's reliable. Malik leaned against the doorway. His company has 2 recent complaints. Every contractor has complaints. One says he substituted unapproved vent material. I know Calvin. Malik's expression hardened. You knew Harborlight, too. The words landed where he intended. I signed the deposit authorization anyway. For the first week, Calvin moved quickly. Old venting came down. New sections went up. He sent photographs each evening and promised the permit inspection would be simple. Then he stopped answering. On the 10th day, Denise arrived for a progress review. She climbed a ladder, inspected one joint, and came down holding a section of pipe. This is not rated for the temperature. My throat tightened. How much has to come out? All of it. Rosa sat on an overturned bucket. The deposit was gone. 9 days of work had bought us a second failure. Malik looked at me, but he did not say "I told you so." That made it worse. I drove to Calvin's listed office. The building was empty. His phone had been disconnected. When I returned, Malik was packing his laptop. "Where are you going?" "Home. We have work, we have fraud, no cash, and 14 days. I made a bad call, you made an old call." I stared at him. "You keep treating every problem like Harborlight in 2005, he said. "Handshakes, personal history, people who supposedly owe you. Experience matters. So does checking whether your experience is outdated." Rosa said his name softly, but he continued, "You didn't trust the data because it came from me. I didn't trust a complaint page more than a man I had known for 20 years. And now Teresa may miss rent because your memories felt more reliable than facts." That was the cruelest thing he had said to me. It was also true. "You think software can replace judgment." I said no. "I think pride can disguise itself as judgment." He took his bag and left. That night I helped remove the bad venting. Around 2 in the morning, the room tilted. I sat down before anyone saw me fall. Rosa found me with one hand pressed to my chest. "You're gray, it will pass." She called an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctor said exhaustion had triggered another episode of arrhythmia. He did not forbid me from working. He told me to stop pretending my body was 30 years younger. Rosa sat beside the bed. "You can't save this place by dying in it." "I'm not dying, that is not the standard." The next morning, Malik appeared carrying coffee. "I found Calvin," he said. "His new company bid on county work under a different name. Same license number. Can we recover the deposit?" "Not fast enough. Denise can file a materials fraud report, and the bonding company may cover part of it." "I should have listened to you." "Yes, I suppose you came for an apology." "I came because I should not have walked out." We sat in silence. Finally, I said, "I know hotels, you know systems. Neither of us gets to pretend that is enough alone." Malik held out his hand. "Agreed." We rebuilt the plan. A local contractor agreed to finish the work at cost after Denise documented the fraud. Malik secured prepaid rooms for 2 port crews. Rosa sold unused kitchen equipment. I negotiated delayed payments and called former Harborlight employees who knew commercial maintenance. Not all of them came. Enough did. We passed re-inspection on day 29. The following week, a tropical storm stalled over the coast. Roads flooded, power failed, and the county needed rooms for displaced families. Denise recommended Mariner's Rest because we had evacuation procedures, backup lighting, and a staff trained to handle frightened guests. For 6 nights, every room was full. No one asked whether the lobby furniture matched. They asked whether their children were safe. That storm changed our business. Other independent motel owners began calling Rosa. They needed help with emergency plans, booking systems, staffing, inspections, and insurance renewals. At first we answered for free. Then Rosa insisted we charge. "You are building something." She told me, "Stop apologizing for sending an invoice." Over the next 3 years, Mariner's Rest became profitable. Malik developed a shared reservation system for small properties. I created training manuals for night audits, evacuations, guest disputes, and staffing crises. Rosa taught owners how to survive slow seasons without stealing from deposits. We called it Second Bell Hospitality Cooperative. Sometimes the first warning is ignored. The second may be the last chance anyone gets. By our 4th year, we supported 14 properties along the Texas coast. We hired workers over 50 who had been dismissed as too slow, too expensive, or too old to learn new systems. One Monday morning, Malik entered my office carrying a thick inspection file. "We got the Belmont contract," he said. Second Bell had been hired to review emergency readiness across 8 coastal hotels. He placed the first folder in front of me, Property 7. Harborlight INN for 8 years. I had imagined walking through those doors again. Now someone was paying me to decide whether they were safe enough to remain open. I did not open the Harborlight file. Malik stood across from my desk, waiting. "You want me to assign it to someone else?" he asked. "Yes, you built the place. That is exactly why I should not inspect it." He studied me for a moment. Conflict of interest. Conflict of memory. I slid the folder back toward him. Take Denise with you. Treat it like any other property. If it fails because of the building, not because of me. Malik nodded, but before he left, he glanced at the brass key hanging from the edge of my desk. You sure? No, I said. That is different from being wrong. 3 days later, a young filmmaker arrived at Mariner's Rest with 2 cameras, a folding tripod, and the distracted expression of someone who had slept in his car between jobs. His name was Noah Sloan. I did not recognize him. 8 years can change a child into a stranger. The last clear image I carried of my grandson was a 10-year-old boy racing toy boats through the Harborlight fountain while Rachel pretended not to notice. The man standing in our lobby was 23, taller than Grant, with Rachel's eyes and Arthur's habit of pressing his lips together when he concentrated. He had been hired by the county tourism board to film a short series about coastal businesses prepared to shelter families during hurricanes. Rosa introduced us. This is Evelyn Mercer, she said. She built half the systems you're filming. No shook my hand. Nice to meet you, Ms. Mercer. His voice did not change. There was no recognition. I told myself I was relieved. For 2 days he filmed our staff inspecting backup generators, converting conference rooms into temporary sleeping areas, and practicing evacuation calls. He asked good questions, not dramatic ones, practical ones. How do you decide who gets the last available room? What happens when someone cannot pay? Who tells a family their pet cannot stay? On the 3rd afternoon, he came into my office to record a close shot of our old manual check-in process. The brass Harborlight key lay beside my ledger. He stopped adjusting the camera. Where did you get that? I looked at the key. It was mine. He stepped closer. Harborlight, Master 1, he read. My grandmother had one like that. The room became very quiet. I looked at his face more carefully. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow. He had gotten it at Harborlight when he was 7, after ignoring me and jumping from a luggage cart. I had held a towel against his forehead, while Rachel cried harder than he did. No, I said. He froze. He stared at me as though the years between us had suddenly become visible. Grandma? I had imagined that word many times. In some versions, I hugged him. In others, I turned away. What I actually did was sit down because my knees no longer trusted me. He lowered himself into the chair across from me. My mom said you moved away. I did. She said you wanted a clean break after the hotel sold. That is not what happened. He looked toward the camera, then switched it off. For the first time since arriving, he seemed younger than 23. Did you know where we were? Yes, then why didn't you call? I wrote. His eyebrows drew together. I never got anything. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and removed a small notebook. For years, I had written down his birthdays, school dates I found through public announcements, and questions I hoped to ask if we ever met again. I did not hand it to him, instead I said, ask your mother what happened to my room. He left before finishing the interview. What happened next? I learned from Noah later. He drove straight to Rachel and Grant's house outside Houston. Rachel was in the kitchen. Grant was on a business call. Noah placed a still photograph of me beside the brass key on the counter. You said Grandma chose to leave. Rachel looked at the image and went pale. She did leave. That isn't what I asked. Grant entered and immediately told Noah the sale had been complicated. Noah asked one question, what happened to her room? Neither answered. 2 weeks later, a storm damaged the roof of the storage building behind their house. Noah helped move boxes before rain reached them. One carton split open. Inside were my things. Arthur's front desk jacket, Harborlight guest ledgers, family photographs, birthday cards addressed to Noah, letters in my handwriting, dozens of them. The envelopes had never been opened. Noah carried the box into the house. Rachel sat at the dining table while he placed the letters in front of her, one at a time. You told me she stopped trying. Rachel covered her mouth. Grant said the letters had arrived during a difficult period. For 8 years? Noah asked. Grant told him not to speak disrespectfully. Noah pulled out an old corporate binder he had found beneath the letters. Inside were meeting minutes from the week I was hospitalized and printed emails between Grant and Rachel. One line was highlighted by water damage, but still readable. Once she sees the new locks, the argument is over. Noah read it aloud. Rachel began to cry. He did not comfort her. The next morning, she finally told him the truth. Not all of it, but enough. They had timed the sale before I came home. They had removed my belongings. They had kept my letters because Grant feared I might use contact with Noah to reopen the dispute. Rachel had told herself she would return them after things settled down. Things never settled down. They only became easier to hide. 3 days later, a letter arrived at my office. "No, did not ask me to forgive anyone," he wrote. "I found the things you were never allowed to receive. I would like to return them, if you will let me." Behind the letter was an inventory of 23 storage boxes. At the bottom, he had attached a copy of Grant's email about the locks. I read it twice. Then I saw a second attachment, photographs of the unopened birthday letters I had written to Noah for 6 years. Until that moment, I had believed my daughter had taken a hotel from me. Now I understood she had taken years. I agreed to meet Noah at a property Second Bell had recently purchased outside League City. The building had once been a roadside motel. Half the rooms were stripped to concrete. Electricians worked in the West Wing, and volunteers were turning the old breakfast room into a training center. When finished, the property would provide temporary housing during storms and short-term rooms for older adults who had suddenly lost a safe place to live. I chose it because it was unfinished. So were we. Noah arrived in a rented cargo van just after 8 on Saturday morning. He did not bring his cameras. 23 storage boxes were stacked inside. For a moment, neither of us moved. "I didn't open anything," he said. "Thank you. I wasn't sure what belonged to you and what belonged to the hotel." That was the problem from the beginning. We carried the first box into a vacant room. Dust floated through the sunlight, where curtains had not yet been installed. Inside was Arthur's navy front desk jacket. His name tag remained pinned above the pocket. I pressed the fabric between my fingers. Arthur had worn that jacket during hurricanes, wedding receptions, power failures, and one Christmas morning when a pipe burst above room 206. I had not seen it since the day Rachel locked me out. The next box held Harborlight's first guest ledger. The opening entry was dated May 14, 1981, Mr. and Mrs. Walter Fenwick, room 4, 2 nights, paid in cash. Arthur had drawn a small star beside their names because they were our first paying guests. Noah watched me turn the pages. "You remember them?" "I remember everyone from the first year." He smiled faintly. "Mom said you could remember a guest's room number 10 years later. She used to be proud of that." The third box contained family photographs. There was Noah at 7, standing on the luggage cart with a white bandage over his eyebrow. Another showed him asleep beneath the front desk while I finished the night audit. In one picture, Arthur held him up so he could place the star on the Harborlight Christmas tree. Noah sat on the bare floor. "I barely remember this. You were young. I remember the fountain. You put soap in it." His eyes widened. "That was me?" "You blamed a wedding guest." He laughed, then covered his face with one hand. The laugh became something else. "I'm sorry." I closed the ledger. "No," he looked up. "You do not apologize for decisions adults made while you were a child." "But I believed them." "You believed your parents. Children are supposed to be able to do that." He stared at the unopened letters stacked inside the next box. "I was told you left because you wanted a different life." "I wanted my own life. That is not the same as leaving you." He picked up a birthday card addressed to him at 13. "Why did they need me to believe you didn't care?" I had asked myself that question for 8 years. "Because once people admit they hurt someone," I said, "they have to choose between repairing the damage and protecting the story they told about it." He looked toward the door. "They protected the story. Yes, we spent the morning opening boxes. Some things were missing. My wedding photographs were there, but Arthur's watch was not. Several pieces of jewelry had disappeared. My personal financial records had been mixed with hotel invoices. The small wooden sailboat Noah made for me in elementary school had lost its mast. I placed it carefully beside the brass key. "No noticed." "You kept the key. Your mother told me it opened nothing." "Does it?" "Not the door," she meant. Around noon I showed him the property. In the former banquet room, Malik was teaching a group of trainees how to handle an evacuation when the digital reservation system failed. Most were over 50. One woman had spent 30 years as a hospital receptionist before being replaced during a software conversion. A former school custodian was learning overnight security procedures. In room 112, Rosa was showing volunteers how to prepare a space for a guest arriving with only the clothes they were wearing. No watched silently. You built this after Harborlight? With other people, could I film it? You can submit a proposal. He looked surprised. To you. To Malik and the cooperative board. I thought you were in charge. I am responsible. That is not the same as owning every decision. He nodded. What would the film be about? The program, the people you help, maybe the way independent hotels can serve communities during emergencies. Not my family. I looked directly at him. My pain is not a marketing strategy. He accepted that without arguing. At 3 that afternoon, Rosa found me in the hallway. There's a woman outside who says she's your daughter. Through the front window, I saw Rachel standing beside her car. She looked smaller than I remembered. She has been there almost an hour, Rosa said. Did Noah invite her? No, he looks furious. I went outside alone. Rachel's eyes moved over my face as though she were searching for permission to call me Mom. I didn't know if you would let me in. I haven't decided. She nodded. That's fair. No, fair would have been asking before you emptied my home. Her chin trembled, but she did not cry. I brought something you need to see. I let her enter. When she saw the boxes, she stopped walking. Arthur's jacket lay across a chair. The unopened letters were arranged on the table. My old brass key rested beside Noah's broken sailboat. Rachel touched none of them. Noah stood across the room. You told me she stopped writing. I know you watched me believe she didn't want me. I know. Stop saying that. Rachel closed her eyes. I asked the question that mattered. Did you know I would lose the apartment? Yes. The word was almost inaudible. Did you know Grant had arranged to change the locks before I returned? Yes. Did you believe the hotel would fail without the sale? I believed it might. That wasn't my question. She looked at me. I was afraid you would stop the deal and discover how much Grant had borrowed. No, stepped forward. So you chose him. Rachel looked at her son. I chose the life I thought I was protecting. You chose money. I chose your future. No, I said. You used his future to excuse your decision. Noah picked up the printed email Grant had written. I'm releasing this. Rachel went pale. I took the paper from his hand. No, he stared at me. Why are you protecting them? I'm not. They lied for 8 years. Yes, then people should know. Truth should correct the damage. I said, it should not become another weapon simply because we are angry enough to use it. Rachel began crying then. Quietly, she opened the leather folder she had brought and placed several documents on the table. There was a private loan agreement, altered financial disclosures, and an email chain between Grant and the company that purchased Harborlight. I read the first page twice. Grant had hidden a side agreement connected to the hotel's debt. Rachel had signed one of the disclosures, even though she knew the figures were incomplete. If this goes to Belmont, I said, they may sue both of you. I know you could lose your house. I know Grant could lose his license. Her voice shook. I know. No looked between us. Rachel pushed the folder toward me. I came because I'm ready to tell the truth, she said. I just don't know how much of my life it will destroy. I looked at the daughter who had once decided that losing my life was an acceptable price for saving hers. Now she was asking me to help decide what accountability should cost. I did not answer Rachel that afternoon. Accountability should never be decided while everyone in the room is still bleeding. I locked the documents in Second Bell's fireproof cabinet and told her I would contact her after they had been reviewed. No objected. She gave them to you. She gave me copies, I said, and I am not a judge. 3 days later, I sat with Denise, Malik, and an attorney named Laura Chen, who specialized in hospitality companies and commercial fraud. Laura read every page twice. The Harborlight sale probably cannot be undone, she said. Belmont bought the company through a facially valid transaction. But Grant appears to have concealed liabilities, and Rachel signed at least one certification she had reason to know was incomplete. What happens when Belmont learns? Malik asked. They may seek damages and report the matter to licensing authorities. Criminal exposure depends on what reached lenders and insurers. Denise tapped one loan schedule. This number was not on the insurance disclosures. Laura nodded. That is serious. I looked at Rachel's signature near the bottom. What about my belongings and the apartment? You may have civil claims, Laura said. The lifetime occupancy promise was never written into the deed, which weakens that part. Removing your personal property without proper notice is different. So the law can measure the boxes, it can try, but not the years, no, she said quietly. Grant insisted on attending the next meeting first. He arrived in a navy suit with his own attorney, who spent 10 minutes explaining why Harborlight would have failed without the sale. I let him finish. Grant opened a chart showing debt ratios, storm losses, and projected insurance increases. Whatever mistakes were made, he said, the transaction preserved more than 60 jobs. You changed the locks before I came home. The buyer required immediate control. You removed my clothes. The apartment had to be converted. You withheld my letters from Noah. That was a family decision. I leaned forward. You keep describing the building. I am asking what you did to the person inside it. For the first time, Grant stopped performing. You would never have agreed. That does not answer me. You would have fought until the bank took everything. Maybe you would have dragged Rachel down with you. Maybe. He struck the table with one finger. I saved that hotel. You saved the transaction. His attorney whispered something, but Grant ignored him. You think those employees cared who owned the place? They cared about their paychecks. So did I. That is why you hid the debt from me. His face changed. Laura placed the side agreement on the table. Grant's attorney requested a recess. Grant refused. Instead, he looked at Rachel, who had entered quietly. You gave her this? Rachel nodded. You have no idea what you have done. I know what I did 8 years ago. She said, I am trying to stop doing it. Grant walked out. Rachel stayed. She placed a second folder before me. Inside were statements for an investment account, holding what remained of her Harborlight proceeds, a deed to a condominium overlooking the bay, and an assignment transferring her rights to the Harborlight name. I will give you all of it, she said. The account, the condo, the name. I do not want your condo. It was bought with money from the sale. Selling it will not turn it back into my home. Her eyes filled. I don't know how to repay you. You cannot repay 8 years, I know. Then stop trying to make repayment feel like erasure. I had imagined refusing everything and walking away untouched. Real life was less elegant. Money could not return my room, but it could put someone else beneath a roof. I will accept one thing, I said. Not for me. I gave her my conditions. She and Grant would provide complete records to Belmont, the lenders and licensing authorities. They would accept the financial and professional consequences. The remaining proceeds and the condominium would fund temporary housing for older adults displaced by family abuse, fraud, eviction, or natural disaster. Rachel could work with the fund, but she would control no money for 5 years. Grant would have to face former Harborlight employees and admit he concealed the debt. Noah would receive no job, title, or ownership because of his last name. Rachel asked, and if Grant refuses? Then you decide whether telling the truth requires your husband's permission. She signed the first disclosure that afternoon. Grant sent word through his attorney that he would not participate. For several weeks, nothing moved quickly. Belmont opened an investigation. Accounts connected to the sale were frozen. Rachel sold the condominium under supervision and transferred the proceeds into escrow for the housing fund. She lost friends. Grant moved into a hotel near the airport. No did not celebrate, neither did I. One evening, Rachel came to my office and saw the brass master key on my desk. I knew what that key meant to you, she said. I waited. Dad once told me that as long as you carried it, you would believe Harborlight still belonged to you. So you gave it back to prove it didn't. Yes, I wanted you to stop fighting before you started. Her honesty hurt more cleanly than another excuse. I picked up the key. You were right about one thing. Harborlight no longer belonged to me. She lowered her eyes. But this key was never valuable because of one building. What was it valuable for? Because your father trusted me to carry it. Months later, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was my old Harborlight employee badge. The photograph showed me at 59, wearing Arthur's favorite navy blazer. On the back, Grant had written, I found this behind the safe. I should have returned it 8 years ago. There was no apology. I could not tell whether it was the beginning of responsibility or simply another way for him to feel less guilty. For the first time, I was willing to wait and find out. Grant did not call for 4 months. Rachel did. Every second Tuesday, she drove to Second Bell's office with a yellow legal pad. At first, we discussed only the housing fund, Belmont's investigation, and former Harborlight employees. We did not discuss birthdays, holidays, or the 8 years between us. That came later. Healing did not arrive as a grand apology. It arrived as Rachel showing up when no one praised her. It arrived as her reading every complaint submitted to the housing fund and never asking to approve a payment. One cold night, she called about an 80-year-old woman whose nephew had locked her out. Should I bring her? Yes. Rachel drove the woman herself. Grant's consequences came more publicly. Belmont settled its claims after he surrendered his hospitality management license and agreed to repay part of the concealed debt. He avoided prison because he cooperated, but the industry that once welcomed him stopped returning his calls. He found work supervising dispatch at a freight company near Pasadena. It was not the life he had planned. That was not the same as injustice. A year after Rachel brought me the records, Second Bell opened the first key house. The property outside League City had taken longer than expected. Permits stalled, and a plumbing failure flooded 6 completed rooms. One donor withdrew after learning we would house people displaced by family fraud as well as storm victims. I wanted to delay until everything was perfect. Denise reminded me that emergency housing was rarely built under perfect conditions. So we opened with 22 rooms instead of 30, 1 training classroom instead of 2, and a temporary front desk made from cabinets and sealed plywood. The building was full before the ribbon was cut. Older adults waited for insurance payments. A widow's stepson had emptied her account, and 3 families had been displaced by a refinery fire. No one cared that the hallway smelled like fresh paint. Noah submitted his documentary proposal through the same process as everyone else. Malik rejected the first version. "You made Evelyn the hero in every scene," he said. "She founded the program, she made mistakes, so did Rosa, so did I. If you turn this into a saint story, you miss why it works." No rewrote it. The second version centered the residents, staff, and decisions that kept the doors open during emergencies. My family appeared only where the history explained the mission. The board approved it. No still did not receive a title. He enrolled in Second Bell's training program and started on the night shift. He cleaned coffee machines, checked locks, carried luggage, and learned to calm frightened guests without promising what he could not deliver. On his 3rd week, he called me at 2 in the morning. "A guest says someone stole her medication. What have you done?" Checked the room, reviewed the hallway log, and called the pharmacy. "What did you miss?" He was silent, then he said, "Her daughter moved the bottle to keep her from taking a second dose." "Good. Now document it without humiliating either of them." He did. Trust is not inherited. It is practiced until someone is willing to place responsibility in your hands. Rachel understood that too. She joined the Housing Fund's Advisory Council, but could not vote on money. During financial decisions, the treasurer asked her to leave. She left without arguing. That mattered. Grant attended the opening but stood near the back wall. Afterward, he waited until the lobby emptied. "I have said a lot of things that were technically true," he told me. "That was always your talent." He accepted the blow. Then he looked toward the temporary front desk. "I knew changing the locks would hurt you. I ordered it anyway, because I thought pain would make you stop fighting." There was no mention of debt, employees, markets, or necessity. Only the act, only the choice. "That," I said, "is finally the truth. Do you forgive me?" "Not all at once," he nodded. It was the first answer he had accepted without negotiation. Second Bell's ownership documents were signed that winter. The cooperative belonged to its certified managers and long-term employees. No child or grandchild would receive control through inheritance. I kept an honorary chair and 1 vote, the same as every other qualified member. No could earn ownership after 5 years. Rachel could serve the housing fund, but never control it. Some people believed reconciliation should restore every privilege. I had learned the opposite. Forgiveness can reopen a relationship. It should not automatically return the keys. At the first graduation ceremony, 12 trainees stood in the lobby wearing Navy badges. 2 had once stayed at the first key house themselves. No stood among them. I brought out the old brass Harborlight master key. For 9 years it had remained in my pocket, my drawer, or beside my bed. It had represented everything I was denied. Now I placed it in Noah's hand. "This does not belong to you," I said. His smile faded. It does not belong to me either. It will be carried for 1 year by the graduate who earns the highest score in crisis leadership. Next year, you will hand it to someone else. He studied the engraving. What does it open? Responsibility. That night, weather alerts appeared across every phone in the lobby. A hurricane moving north had shifted west. Coastal evacuations began within the hour. The graduates changed into work shirts. Rosa opened emergency supplies. Malik activated overflow. Rachel called partner properties. And Grant moved folding beds without being asked. Near midnight, an elderly couple arrived with their adult daughter and 2 soaked suitcases. Their home had flooded before they could leave. Noah stood behind the temporary desk during his first emergency shift. The husband reached for his wallet. No shook his head and handed him a room card. "You're safe here tonight," he said. "We'll figure out tomorrow in the morning." From across the lobby, he looked at me. The brass key hung from his badge. Years earlier, Rachel had placed it in my palm and told me it opened nothing. She had been right about one thing. It never opened Harborlight again. It opened something better. If this story reminded you of a time you had to rebuild after betrayal, share your experience in the comments. Your words may help someone who feels locked out of their own future.